All right, we will pivot to the advocacy organization Free South Africa and their ideas on what this bailout could have bought South Africa. All right, and we'll bring in to the conversation the Free South Africa spokesperson, Reuben Coetzer. Hi, Reuben. I thought we were going to break there, but we are going straight to, you've heard what Ozara's had to say, but also you have looked at this price tag over the last 10 to 15 years, and you've said there were some important gains that South Africa could have accomplished if that money had been redirected. But let's start you off just in broad strokes around your thoughts on bailouts of the kind that Azar and I were talking about for SOEs in South Africa.
Absolutely. Thank you, Iman. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Yeah, I was listening to what Mr. Jameen said in the previous segment, and I see that you've touched on the return on investment. What's important to note is that former Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, noted that in May 2024 to a parliamentary question that since 2019, from 2019 to May 2024 then, that state-owned enterprises have only received 1 million rand in dividends that has then gone back to the state. And like we mentioned in the previous segment, it cost South African taxpayers roughly 520 billion rand, which is nowhere near a return on investment. And I share the sentiment of Mr. Jameen as well, that we should look at public-private enterprises. At the end of the day, if all the state-owned enterprises that we have mentioned, if it was a private company, the shareholders would be unhappy, the directors would have been fired, and the organization would have been restructured to ensure that it's more efficient, that the profit cost margin is met at the end of the day, and that that the services are delivered to those that they serve. So clearly we see that from a business perspective for the government, state-owned enterprises don't make sense anymore. And that's why we really would encourage public-private partnerships. I think going to make state-owned enterprises private in first and foremost is something that's not necessarily going to help with efficiency. But if we can start out by public-private enterprises and partnerships and collaboration, then from there on one can look at fully privatizing it. Because at the end of the day, this is costing South African taxpayers money, and it's not meeting the goals and the outcomes that the state-owned enterprises need to meet from their perspective.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, the privatization concept is a hot topic in South Africa, and there's a lot of controversy around it, especially when you think of the view of the unions and the like when it comes to going this particular route in South Africa. I think it might be worth having a standalone conversation on entities that have been privatized or part privatized and what their fates have been in South Africa. I know Azar did touch on it slightly there. But let's talk then, and of course the finance minister was speaking at that World Bank event. Oh, by the way, before I go into the World Bank, I just went to go and have a look. The 1 million rand dividend that did come, the one that Pravin Gordhan was referring to, actually came from South African Forestries. You know, who knew? A small entity, but there was some money back there. All right, so let's talk about then his comments at that World Bank event around the collective expenditure over the last 15 years on SOEs and their bailouts. Tell us what work you then embarked upon after hearing that.
Yes, so at Free SA, we're a non-partisan policy organization that really focuses on advocacy and providing research and analysis of the various government policies to ensure that there's more public participation and that citizens actually understand where their money is going and what their taxes and the money that they pay through indirect taxes like VAT is being utilized for at the end of the day. So like we mentioned, the figure of bailouts roughly estimates to 520 billion rand over the past 15 years, but that's also not a figure that is 100% precise and accurate. That's predominantly due to the fact that a lot of the various state-owned entities have some inconsistent reporting when it comes to their financial reporting. They also have different definitions of bailouts like direct recapitalizations, guarantees, debt takeovers, etc. So it's difficult to determine the exact amount. But from our perspective, if you work with the 520 billion rand over the past 15 years, we've gone and we've broken it down to see exactly what it could have gotten South African citizens on issues that are important to South African citizens, rather than using taxpayer dollars and reallocating funds to bail out entities which are clearly not delivering the services and clearly not turning a profit for the state and for South African citizens. And when we've done that comparison, we see that of the 520 billion rand that was used in bailouts, that would equate to roughly 8,600 rand per person in South Africa for every South African person. And that funds could have been used to build, on an estimate, over 8,600 new schools, over 2.6 million new homes, and could have assisted us in creating a police force about 3 times the size of what it is today. And I think that just illustrates the magnitude of the funds that have been spent on bailing out state-owned enterprises to no end, with no end in sight. It is a sinking ship, and we see that the bailouts really have not delivered and assisted in saving the sinking ship.
And as you say, the number could be far more than what's being put on the table, because for the reasons that you mentioned, there might not be always factual reporting and a range of other things. You know, others might say these SOEs collectively employ north of 100,000 people. And so, you know, not allowing them to survive till they get to a point of health again. We've seen some green shoots of growth and turnaround when it comes to, again, quite prolifically, Eskom being among those. That you know, there would be a number of people's jobs and livelihoods on the line, and that would cause economic and unemployment chaos in the country.
Yeah, Iman, I think with state-owned enterprises, we've set the bar quite low. I think marginal growth for us, we often overhype it, and it signifies more growth for us than it actually means. When in reality, privatizing or partly privatizing state-owned enterprises would have a snowball effect that will address all the issues that you mentioned. For instance, like I mentioned, the taxpayers' money that is already being utilized for state-owned enterprises bailouts could have been utilized and invested in schools, in hospitals, in the economy to ensure that we create growth and create more jobs. So I think the snowball effect of not having to utilize this 520 billion rand over 15 years for bailouts will be effective in covering for those jobs. I mean, if you privatize or partly privatize state-owned enterprises, you will ensure more efficiency. You will ensure that there's hopefully, based on past experience, that there's a greater profit turn. And with greater profits and more efficiency, you can stimulate economic growth, and economic growth leads to further investment and further expansion, and the further investment in other industries and expansion of the various entities then in that capacity in public and private partnerships will then ensure that you create more jobs for South Africans at the end of the day. So it is a snowball effect. And sometimes we have to really bite the bullet to ensure that in the long run, we can do what's best for South Africans and South African citizens at the end of the day.
Thank you, Reuben Coetzer, who is the spokesperson for Free South Africa. Appreciate your time today.